So I've got Adam Furtado here. We're going to have a little discussion. He's going to help me run what I'm calling my campaign platform, not for president, but against wide-angle lenses being the automatic choice for landscapes. And I think Adam's a really interesting person to talk to, well, for a lot of reasons. He's just an interesting guy. But especially interesting because we just traveled across New Zealand with amazing landscapes. And I saw you shooting on that trip a lot with a 100 to 400. Now that's, in my mind, about as far away from a wide angle lens that you can get. But before we get into all that whole discussion, let's nicely introduce you. As I said, we've traveled together before. We both worked with McKay's. You also run Photo Nerds Unite, and I'll pull that up on the screen right here. Can you tell us a little bit about how you help people at Photo Nerds, Adam, before we start talking about lenses?
Yeah, Photo Nerds is the reason Photo Nerds started was because we would go on these trips all the time with the McKays, and we found that a lot of the beginner or to even intermediate and advanced clients, they were constantly coming up with the same questions over and over again. And of course, we're answering those questions, on the trip and explaining and showing and all that. But it's very easy for them to forget that stuff when they get back home. And so quite often they'd be sending me emails or Facebook posts or something saying, "Hey, what was that thing on Instagram, histogram again?" Or what was that editing technique? So we created Photo Nerds as a resource center to help answer these questions. And it's not right now. It's mostly videos on post-processing, but there are a lot of blog content on composition and aperture and shutter speed and all that kind of stuff too. So it's really started as a resource center, to be honest.
Cool, cool. It looks great. You've posted some videos through my site, which I think is great. You're creating some awesome content. You also offer one-on-one mentoring?
Yeah, we also do one-on-one mentoring, and that's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we do. A lot of clients, they go on, YouTube and all these other things, and they watch the videos, but nothing compares to being able to have like a one-on-one
Right.
conversation with someone live for an hour. We work on your photos, or your photography live, and answer all your questions from anything, workflow, organization, Photoshop, Lightroom, sky's the limit.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. Yeah, the one-on-one is powerful. That's great. Well,
Yep.
Thanks for joining me, and let's talk
Thanks
a
for
little
having
bit.
me.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, we're headed to New Zealand. Wildlife really wasn't in the picture on this trip. It's not like Tanzania. It's not like one of the trips that Animals of Montana belongs on, where you run a really zoom in on a mountain lion or a grizzly bear or something. What was your thinking in bringing along the 100 to 400?
Outside of the fact that I'm just crazy like that, that fact aside, well, it's interesting because my favorite lens, like my go-to lens, is the 70 to 200. That's usually the lens that I grab first most of the time. So when you think about it, right, that 1 to 400 falls kind of in that realm, but it just gives me a little bit more length. A funny story is that I knew that we had the African safari coming up with the McKays, which they're running that awesome giveaway for, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
I went to Africa last year and I shot a 400 prime. And I realized that with the 400 prime, even though it gave me the length that I wanted, it was a little bit restrictive because it's a prime lens, right? So I wanted to give the 1-400 a try in the New Zealand trip. But shooting long is something that I usually do anyways. And I figured if I left my 70 to 200 home and just brought the 1 to 400, it would really force me to shoot it. Because it was either that, another thing I don't even know if you know, it was either that or I only brought a wide angle and a 50 prime. So I had 3 lenses in my bag, and that was it. So I was either going to shoot it, or everything was going to be 50 millimeters, you know?
Yeah. Was your wide angle the 17 to 40?
Yeah, 17 to 40.
And then just so people know, you're shooting on a full frame Canon 6D?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, why do you kind of find yourself gravitating towards that 70 to 200 focal length?
Yeah, so it's interesting. On the wide angle shots, I really like how it skews perspective and you can really accentuate things in the foreground and things like that. However, I find that sometimes seeing everything makes it a little bit more difficult to decide or showcase what your subject matter is.
Yes.
So going with a telephoto lens really restricts your field of view. It kind of gives you these horse blinder type feel, and so you have to be very specific of your compositions, and you have to be very thoughtful in what your subject matter is and how you're going to portray that. And I think that going long and telephoto really helps that, and it also simplifies the photographs, which I love. So for me, the simpler I can make it, the better.
Right. I think that that's the fantastic about that kind of your subject can easily get lost in a wide angle. A lot of people think they want to walk up to this landscape scene, this epic scene, and just capture everything in front of them. But then immediately,
Yeah,
you as the viewer, you're looking around and you're like, what's the subject here? Accentuating the foreground, an interesting object or something like that that is the subject can work. But if you don't really have that, I like the idea of
yeah.
you're simplifying. And I brought along the 70 to 200, and I shot most of the landscapes I enjoyed with that lens in New Zealand as well, for much the same reasons. And additionally, I liked how we had some epic mountains on the South Island, Mount Cook and the ranges around those that I can't pronounce. And using the 70 to 200, really kind of brought that right up into your face, and
Yeah.
you had these mountains. The first picture I'm going to bring up Lightroom now, and we're going to go through a couple of your pictures. We'll go through a couple of mine that kind of showcase shooting. The first one I want to bring up of yours is this one of Mount Cook, and it's kind of peeking out from behind these two peaks here. The impact of that mountain right there is fantastic. This is just an awesome picture. So
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, that was shot at 100 millimeters. So theoretically, right, I could have brought that 70 to 200 and gotten that same similar shot.
yeah,
But there's something about that 1 to 400, even with apertures that aren't very wide, the compression on that lens is just so beautiful. So, and it's tack sharp, right? So, I don't know that the quality would have been the same. I wasn't able to test that, but
yeah,
it looked phenomenal at 100. And you know exactly what the subject matter is, which is what I wanted.
yeah. Another one, we're looking at the Mossy Falls, where you just have this kind of nice green wrapping around and a little bit of blur of water coming down on the left side of the image.
Another thing to consider when you're shooting is the light. And some of these locations that we went to, unfortunately, we might not have been there at that perfect time of day. And so the light was a little spotty. And so in those situations, telephoto is fantastic because you can get past all the riffraff. If I would have shot that same scene at a wide angle, it wouldn't look nearly as beautiful because the light was really nice in that concentrated area.
Yeah, but up
And
up
that
top,
telephoto allows you to pull that off.
yep, yep. I remember that up top it was pretty bright and it would just be kind of washed out and flat.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
real spotty, right?
yeah, yep. It was
Yeah.
definitely very spotty.
So the reason I threw this in there was not necessarily because, again, it was anything epic. Like Hobbiton, I mean, you're a big Lord of the Rings fan, right?
Yeah,
Some of your followers might throw stones at me when they find out that I'm not necessarily a huge fan. I think it's visually beautiful, but anyways, that place was awesome. But again, the light was really harsh, and so it was difficult. So what I was doing was trying to tell the story of that little house. But more importantly, I was pretty surprised because that lens, the aperture on that lens is only 4.5 to 5.6. But in this
right.
example, in that photograph, there's some really nice, soft foreground depth of field there,
Yep.
and the flowers that I focused on are tack sharp. So again, because of that impression, and also from standing back, you're forced to stand back because it's so tight. That 4.5 is almost as soft as a 2.8. So I thought that was really interesting. I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Yep. Yep. I think that's really nice. And yeah, that's another great point. People look at these apertures and think that they're not going to be able to get good depth of field if they want it. But at these longer focal lengths, you can. You can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was real nice and soft. I liked it.
Yeah. We're looking at a really nice detail at Rotorua, the kind of volcanic stuff in this
Yeah.
little bit of yellow sulfur.
So this was interesting because I remember getting to Rotorua, and as we were getting off the tour bus, we knew that we only had so much time, and we also knew that there was going to be a lot of walking. And typically, I just bring my whole bag, right? Everyone jokes about how I always got my tripod and I always got my bag. But in this case, I think just because of the time of the trip or whatever, I made a decision to just grab one lens, and I happened to bring the 1-400. Now, when I got there, that geyser that was going off, which is where this picture was taken, was actually a really epic scene. But again, I think the light at that particular time, there were some clouds rolling in, so it was a little flat.
Yep.
So I just made a decision: grab the 1-400, grab some detail stuff, and what I loved about that particular geyser was all the color coming in from those formations and the texture that was there. If I would have shot it at a wide angle or maybe even a mid-level lens, I would have introduced a lot of other stuff, and I may have not really gotten that detail in those textures that I did in this shot. So the 1-400 was perfect for that scene.
I agree. And again, it's about, singling out, finding in the picture what your subject is, and then, capturing that. And a long angle or a long telephoto lens lets you really get in there and do that.
So that was the last day right before our dinner. We were in Queenstown, and we had gone to the waterfront to shoot sunset. And in that example, I did have my wide angle with me. But what I noticed about that coast on New Zealand were the waves were really tiny,
Mm-hmm.
and they were slow rolling, and I was like, man, those were cool. And because the water was so clear, you could actually see the rocks through the bottom of the wave as it curled. And so I was like, man, if I set that composition up and shoot it just at the right time, I'd probably get the rocks in behind the wave as it curled. Well, I was not being successful at this. It was a train wreck. I shot a bunch of shots, but getting the focus right and all that was really difficult. So what I ended up doing was noticing how the light was casting over the water anyways, and the texture and the movement that I was getting in that. So instead of shooting the rocks, I ended up going for the light and for the waves. And that shot outside of the Mount Cook shot is probably one of my favorite images of the whole trip.
It's a fantastic shot. The colors and that abstract there are just beautiful. Really nice.
Yeah.
Nice work. I'm going to show a couple of my 70-200 shots. The first one of that first nights that we went out shooting, even I think before the tour officially started, here in Auckland, we were across this little, call it the bay there, and using the 70-200 just allowed me to fill the frame with just the parts of the city skyline that really had the most impact and I thought were the most interesting. So I'm really happy with this shot. This is one of my favorite shots from the trip, and happened to take it like on that first day. And then moving on to talk a little bit about, again, that kind of that landscape area or down around Mount Cook, where it's just with these epic mountains. And there were times where I would put my 24-70 on, mostly because I had a circular polarizer for that. And, I just wanted that, or sometimes I wanted to put the neutral density filter on to get longer shutter speeds. But I kept finding myself looking at the mountains through the back of the camera and feeling like they were just kind of made puny.
Yeah.
And having that 70-200 just kind of allows you to pull that in closer.
Yeah, it was as if even if you had like a really awesome foreground subject and you were to incorporate that in the wide angle, I almost felt in certain times that because the mountains were so far in the distance, that the photo really became about the foreground subject and not necessarily the mountains. And so then I was like, well, if the foreground is so interesting, then why don't I just shoot the foreground? Why do I need to incorporate the mountains that you can't see?
Right. That's another great point. So often we walk up with our eyeballs, we see this whole scene, it looks amazing to us, but in the camera just kind of gets lost, and you
Yeah,
at times have to make that choice or that sacrifice that says, here's what's the most interesting piece right now. There's amazing mountains over there, but these pebbles
yeah.
or the waves on the shore make a really cool story as well.
Yeah, don't be greedy. You don't need it all. Sometimes, like you said, sacrifice something for a more interesting subject matter.
That's right. Yep. Don't be greedy. That's a great way. Let's just end it right there. So, yeah, I think that's good. Let me stop my screen sharing. We'll put this away. We'll come back to you. Um, and I think there was a lot of good tidbits in this video we just recorded, Adam. So,
Little nuggets.
little nuggets. Don't be greedy. Don't let your subject get lost. Yeah. And telephoto lenses, even longer ones like the 100 to 400, are perfectly acceptable for landscapes, and in many cases, we prefer them. Is what we should say.
Yeah, I uh, I I would never leave my house on an excursion without a wide angle. I mean, without a telephoto
That's
lens.
telephoto.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't do it. Whether it was the 70 to 200 or the 1 to 400, something telephoto is going to be in my bag. It has
That's
to
great.
be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good advice. So folks should take that. If they don't have a telephoto, they should. If they have a telephoto and they haven't thought about shooting landscapes with it, they're only out there trying to get birds in their backyard or something like that, then they should get out and try shooting some landscapes. Adam, thank you so much for joining me. Folks can find more information about you and the services you provide at Photo Nerds Unite. And we'll put a link to that right down below. Plus, we mentioned that photorec.tv giveaway where you can join a Tanzania trip. Give us like one sentence about Tanzania. You've
Does the
been?
sentence have to be structured like an actual sentence, or
Nah,
can it just be adjectives?
just adjectives, sure.
Like amazing, awesome, unbelievable, like exclamation point, exclamation point.
Yep.
Yeah. It was never on my bucket list, but it should be on everyone's bucket list. It was awesome.
Yep. That's awesome. I'm so excited to go, and you're headed back there as well. So we'll put the
Yeah.
link to enter that if you haven't already right down below. And we're going to put the link to check out more about the 100 to 400 because that is a fantastic lens, and it is a fantastic lens. It's not cheap,
It's really, really good, man. It's
but
so good.
I don't think there's anything negative I could say about it. It's travel friendly, and it is
Yeah.
fantastically sharp. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little heavy, but I think if you sacrifice some of those other lens options for that one, and you only bring a few, like I did, it's not really that bad. I don't feel like my bag was any heavier than it's normally been.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
It's
good to
awesome.
know. All right. Adam, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, bud.
Bye-bye.
Hasta.